Hey guys, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and I'm bringing you another edition of the Daily Dose. And today I want to talk about the chart of Kevin Spacey. I had actually recorded this reading maybe a week or so ago and ended up not posting it because there has been continued allegations, and I just wanted the story to develop a little bit more before I actually addressed his chart. He was born on July 26th, 1959 in South Orange, New Jersey. We don't have a birth time, so I'm working from a solar chart. And Kevin Spacey is a Leo sun at 2 degrees. He has an interesting square from Neptune at 4 degrees Scorpio. That's really one of two major aspects to his sun. This sun squared Neptune is particularly interesting because one of the reasons that he gave for the very first accusation that was given against him was that he was drunk and he didn't remember doing whatever happened. Well, that is possibly very true, because people with Sun squared Neptune, they tend to seek transcending the self, the ego, which is the sun, through means like using drugs or alcohol. And so it's very possible that it may not necessarily be that he doesn't remember, but that he was in an inebriated state, at least when this particular incident happened. But just in general, Sun squared Neptune can be a challenge for people because they might seek the fast track to that experience of transcendence rather than seeking it through alternative means like spiritual study or meditation, or something that takes more concentration and more focus, rather than just wanting to kind of like get out of it quickly. Then the other aspect to his sun is an inconjunct from Saturn at 1 degree Sagittarius. So, actually, 1 degree Capricorn. So when you have Sun inconjunct Saturn, it's like they don't necessarily see each other. So on one hand, you have this solar energy, this solar Leo energy wanting to shine through being creative and through seeking attention and through bestowing attention on others. But then you have Saturn in Capricorn. Now Saturn's very comfortable in Capricorn because Saturn rules the sign of Capricorn. This is, the energy of just working really hard and knowing that things take time to develop, and putting the effort into creating things over the long term. But if they're not quite seeing eye to eye, you might get something where either that Saturnian energy turns in on oneself and you can be very self-critical and hard on yourself, or perhaps you reflect it outward, towards others, and you can be quite demanding and quite sort of cool or cold in the way that you express yourself at times. Now, something that also relates to this Saturn and Capricorn type of energy is that he's got a stellium of planets. So he's got Pluto at 2 degrees Virgo, he's got Mars at 3 degrees Virgo, and he's got Venus at 11 degrees Virgo. So these three planets all together create what's called a stellium, and they all kind of resonate together. Well, if we break this down, if we look at just the Pluto and the Mars conjunct, this is the same energy in Harvey Weinstein's chart. Now in his chart, Pluto and Mars are square, but in Kevin Spacey's chart, Pluto and Mars are conjunct. They sit side by side. So Mars, how you assert yourself, your strength, your male energy, your male sexuality. Pluto, power, control. When we're not operating with Pluto being conscious, it can turn into manipulating and trying to, control others. And Pluto works that way. If we're not very conscious of our Pluto energy, if we're not thinking of the group or the whole, then it can filter through the subconscious in these negative ways where we're trying to seek power and control over others. So this is a very intense energy to have Mars and Pluto together, and it's probably what has been operating in him in these situations where he tries to come on to people and essentially kind of when they don't do what he wants, he gets very aggressive, both physically and verbally. This is definitely indicative of that kind of behavior. And Pluto is also a sexual energy. So you've got Mars and Pluto, both sexual energies combined together in his chart. And Venus is there too, which is his feminine, loving energy. So there's a lot of power here connected to his the two planets, Mars and Venus, that are symbolic of male and female sexuality in the chart and issues around power. And I say issues around power because the Pluto and the Mars are opposite Chiron in Aquarius. So it's an out of sign opposition because the Mars and Pluto are in early Virgo, but the Chiron's in late Aquarius at 26 degrees. So it's an out of sign opposition, but it's an opposition nonetheless. And it's Chiron in Aquarius. Now, when we think of Chiron, of course, it's the wound. And Aquarius has to do with a wound around feeling different, a wound around feeling disconnected from the group. And so when we have oppositions with Chiron and Mars and Pluto, opposition always brings in the experience of the other, of relationships. Even though it's our own energy, it gets played out through the people that we relate with. So this could mean that either he himself has felt different, has felt disconnected, and just like, I want to say almost like an alien on this planet, and that wound has a relationship with how he acts towards others with this Mars-Pluto energy. It's like because of this wound, it could stimulate that part of him that seeks to have power and have control, and to essentially try and dominate. Or the other piece of it could be that he attracts wounded people who feel isolated, who don't feel understood, who don't feel accepted. And in that way, they become kind of his victims in a sense, or, they become prey because, they're coming from this place of woundedness in their life, and he, in a sense, can sort of sense that and then do what he does to people in that state. So that's an interesting opposition that he has with this Mars-Pluto conjunction in Virgo in his chart. The other piece of all of this is that there's a T-square operating, and this is with the Mars and the Venus. Excuse me, it's just with the Mars opposite the Chiron, and it squared his Jupiter at 22 degrees Scorpio. So let's just break that down a little bit. You have Mars in Virgo squared Jupiter in Scorpio. So Mars, again, how we assert ourselves, and Jupiter is about our philosophies and how we, see a more expanded view of life. Well, his Jupiter happens to be in Scorpio, so it has to do with exploring the subconscious. It has to do with really kind of like learning about death and regeneration, and kind of like his philosophy might be like, you just let go and you move on. That's how you get through things. That's how you move forward in life. So, but to have that energy squaring the Mars in Virgo can just mean at times he might worry a bit about how to do that. The Mars in Virgo, Mars wants the details, and Mars in Virgo wants to analyze and to break things down. But Jupiter in Scorpio is like, we're moving on. We are done and we're moving forward. That's our philosophy. So there can be this kind of challenge to express the two energies together. And then the other part of the T-square then would be the Jupiter and the Chiron squaring. A lot of the trying to move forward, a lot of the Jupiter and Scorpio stuff, it's hard because of the wound, because of feeling somehow like, you're an alien, you're separate from the rest of everybody else, So this could actually be an instance where it's difficult to transform. It's difficult. That's Jupiter and Scorpio. It's difficult to do that because of the woundedness that you feel. It can kind of maybe keep you from really allowing yourself to kind of connect to that process. Maybe you just feel separate and you feel so disconnected from your feelings, that Chiron and Aquarius, that you really have a hard time transforming in that Jupiter and Scorpio type of way. You get stuck. So this is his T-square, Mars, Jupiter, and Chiron. And it's probably, some of this T-square is probably what has kept him in his patterns for a long time, just not fully being able to embrace, the process of transformation because of, the disconnection from actually being able to feel, which could also be Chiron and Aquarius, and also kind of a fear, around asserting in ways that are healthy and in ways that really are the right thing to do, essentially. Mars and Virgo. And you know what else could be going on here too is just an obsession. Pluto and Mars together. Pluto obsesses. Pluto, it's like you get possessed. I want this. This is what I want, and it can be a challenge to really break those patterns, especially if we're not kind of operating with Pluto on a conscious level. And then when you bring in a wound in Aquarius, you might not even be really connecting with feelings very well, and kind of recognizing either your own or that others' feelings are important too. And then Jupiter just amplifies it all. And Jupiter in Scorpio also has that Plutonian vibe to it, where it's like, I want to expand through getting what I want, through, if it's operating Jupiter and Scorpio in an obsessive compulsive way. If you're operating more consciously, then you're recognizing these parts of yourself, and you're working on letting go and not having to be so controlled by these desires. I'm going to move to the Sun. What is interesting about his chart is that the Mars and Pluto are trined by Saturn. So basically what this is saying is that he's obviously like extremely hardworking, and he'll get very passionate about something, and he'll really just kind of put all of his energy into it, and until he sees it through. That's what Mars Pluto trine Saturn would do. It's just lots of good hardworking energy. Now, before I move on to transits and progressions and solar arcs, I do want to say that, and I don't know if this is a credible source, but he has a brother who has been interviewed, and I think originally the Mail, which I don't think is a really reputable source, broke the story, but then another business, I think it's called Business Insider, they also ran the story. So it felt like maybe, there was some credibility to it, but I really don't know, but I'm going to put it out there. Anyway, just as food for thought, because you have to wonder, like, how do people become this way? What is it that they've experienced in their life that led them to behave in the ways that they do? And sometimes it's because we've had experiences in childhood that have influenced us. It's not always, but ultimately, yes. I mean, it is nurture. There's nurture and there's nature, so you have to wonder what part of his nurture growing up may have led to some of his behaviors. And what this brother has been interviewed as saying is that they had a very abusive father. And the brother is actually saying that he himself was raped by the father. And apparently he's never really talked to Kevin Spacey about this very deeply, but basically just described their father as just this really horrible person. So that's possibly one reason that, this all came about. I mean, his chart indicates he's got power issues, and a lot of times this predatory kind of behavior has to do with being obsessed with power or wanting to dominate, other people. And that's the motivation behind it. It's to want to try and control and try and dominate. So and especially with Mars, it's, in a sexual way as well, and also with Pluto. But, and then the Venus is next to it as well. So, but there's an element of, really wanting to have control over others. And that's what kind of fuels why these people with this kind of behavior do what they do. All right, so let's move on to some of the transits that are happening right now. Well, one transit that is interesting is that transiting Neptune, which is at 11 degrees, and it's just getting ready to go direct this month, is exactly opposing his Venus, his loving energy, his creativity. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime transit, and again, because it's an opposition, it brings in the aspect of relationships and of dealing with the other. And sometimes with Neptune, things can get confusing, things can get unclear. It can be a very spiritual time, but sometimes it's like attracting people into your life that you just kind of don't really see very clearly. But in this instance, it's hard to say exactly how this is operating, although what I will say is that, there is a possibility here for him to really begin to connect on a spiritual level with himself and the expression of his loving energy. I know he's seeking some type of treatment right now. And it's, perhaps this is the time where he is going to begin to kind of be able to really look at himself with more compassion, and that is what is required, really, if we're gonna heal our own issues. We have to ultimately, accept how we are and how we have behaved, and start from that place of acceptance. So with this Neptune opposite Venus, this could be a time where he is closer to the opportunity to have more of a spiritual perspective about himself, and to perhaps implement that into his healing. The other interesting thing is that he's got Pluto progressed. And this is conjuncting his Mars. It was mainly last year, but the effects are probably still being felt. So basically, he was born with Pluto at 2 degrees Virgo, and then his Mars was at 3 degrees Virgo. So the progression of Pluto is very slow, and often it's not used because of that fact in order to analyze a chart. But in this instance, Pluto at 2 degrees has progressed over his Mars at 3 degrees. So Mars, sexuality, asserting the self. Pluto, death and transformation at its most elevated. Obsession and compulsion at its most difficult expression. So really, he is having an opportunity to obviously explore this part of his nature, and to really transform this part of himself, if he takes on that perspective of really wanting to look deeply at himself, which I'm sure, well, I don't know for sure, but I would think at this point, when things are really difficult, that that would be what you would want. You want to figure this out. You want to relieve the pain. You want to somehow get to a place where you can accept yourself again. So that's an interesting progression that he is experiencing. And the last thing I want to point out is that his solar arc Neptune has also moved into a new sign. It's also moved into Capricorn. Neptune is our spirituality. Neptune is our ability to transcend the ego and to really connect with, whatever it is that we think is, where we come from, our source. But in general, just kind of spiritual connection that helps us kind of recognize that there's something bigger going on than besides just our egoic needs in this life, and it can infuse us with feelings of compassion and sensitivity towards others and wanting to help others. So with Neptune moving into Capricorn by solar arc in his chart right now, this could just mean his spiritual work is just beginning. He's going to really have to focus on some sort of practical, spiritual practice for himself, that he would benefit from that he would make gains from that he would be able to build his reserves and his resources if he really seriously kind of took on some sort of practical spiritual approach to his life at this time. So that is my interpretation of the chart of Kevin Spacey. I just want to end with saying, in discussing his chart, in no way am I condoning anything that has occurred, and at the same time, I believe that all of us here having human experiences have an opportunity to learn and to grow and to change, and I just hope that at this time, this is really a turning point for him in his life, and that he seeks the help that he needs, and that he gets the help that he needs, and he gets the support that he needs, and that, you know, he can at some point come to a place in his life where he can sort of accept and recognize that obviously this is not the way to be with people, to treat people, and that he'll heal. So thank you for watching. If you're interested in subscribing to my channel, please do. And you can also reach me for readings at lindsayc73@gmail.com. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Adios.